My name is Marjorie, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I've been happily married to my husband Frank for 35 years, and together we raised our only daughter Stephanie, now 27. We poured our love dreams and savings into planning her perfect wedding. What should have been the happiest day of her life turned into the most devastating day of mine. I never imagined that the child we cherished would speak those crushing words to us. If you're watching this from somewhere in your home today, please hit that like button and subscribe so we can connect through shared experiences that shape us in unexpected ways. I want to take you back to the beginning to help you understand just how much Frank and I adored Stephanie. We were both raised in middle-class families and worked hard for everything we had. Frank built a successful contracting business while I managed the books and later became an elementary school teacher. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable and could provide well for our daughter. Stephanie was our miracle baby. After 3 miscarriages, the doctors told us we might never have children. When I finally carried her to term, we felt like we had won the lottery. Perhaps that's why we spoiled her more than we should have. Frank always said, "We have only one shot at parenting, so let's make it count." And count we did in every ballet lesson, science camp, college preparation course, and designer clothing purchase. Our bond was especially close during her early years. I still remember how she would climb into my lap every evening for story time, her small fingers tracing the illustrations as I read. She would look up at me with those big brown eyes and say, "Mummy, you're my best friend." Those words were tattooed on my heart. When Stephanie went off to Northwestern University, I cried for 3 days. Frank reminded me that this was what we had worked for, to give her wings, strong enough to fly. She thrived in college, making the dean's list consistently and building an impressive network of friends. It was during her junior year when she met Jacob at a campus fundraiser. He was studying finance and came from what his mother, Patricia, frequently described as old money from Connecticut. When Stephanie first brought him home during Christmas break, I noticed something different about her. She was more conscious of her appearance, more careful with her words, almost as if she was auditioning for a role. I can't say I was immediately fond of Jacob. There was something calculated about his charm, a practiced quality to his compliments. But I kept these thoughts to myself. Frank always said, "Our job is to love her, not to pick who she loves." So when they announced their engagement 4 years after meeting, we responded with genuine enthusiasm. "We want you to have the wedding of your dreams," Frank told her over champagne the night they shared the news. "Your mother and I will cover all the expenses." The gratitude in Stephanie's eyes that night was something I would cling to in the difficult months ahead. The wedding planning began in earnest. We initially discussed a budget of $35,000, which seemed more than generous to me. Frank and I had married in my parents' backyard, with fewer than 50 guests. But times had changed, and Stephanie had different expectations. The first time I noticed something was off was during a cake tasting. Stephanie had invited me, but when I arrived, Patricia was already there, dominating the conversation with the baker. Stephanie barely acknowledged my input, and when I suggested a flavor combination she had loved since childhood, she quickly dismissed it. "Mum, that's so outdated. Nobody does that anymore." I smiled through the sting, telling myself this was normal pre-wedding stress. I couldn't have known it was just the beginning. The change in Stephanie wasn't sudden. It was a gradual transformation that became impossible to ignore as the wedding day grew closer. 6 months before the wedding, my sweet, thoughtful daughter had morphed into someone I barely recognized. It started with small things. Stephanie began excluding me from important decisions, claiming it was more efficient to limit the number of opinions. Somehow, Patricia was never subject to this efficiency rule. She was included in every bridal shopping trip, Every meeting with vendors, her opinions carrying more weight than water in the desert. Patricia says the venue you suggested is a bit pedestrian, Stephanie informed me one afternoon. We've found something with more character in Winnetka. The something with more character turned out to be a historic mansion that cost twice what we had budgeted for a venue. When I gently pointed this out, Stephanie's eyes narrowed. If it's too much for you, just say so. Jacob's parents offered to help. Pride kept me from accepting their assistance. No, no. Your father and I have it covered. We want to do this for you. The original $35,000 budget soon ballooned to $75,000. Frank never complained, silently transferring money from our retirement fund to cover the mounting expenses. It's just money, he would say. We can always make more. But money wasn't the only issue. Stephanie became increasingly critical of everything from our home's decor to my clothing choices. When I wore a new dress to dinner with Jacob's family, she pulled me aside afterward. "Mum, that color makes you look washed out. And those shoes with that purse," Patricia noticed immediately. Every conversation seemed to include, "Patricia says," or "Patricia thinks." I began to feel like I was in competition with this woman. A competition for my own daughter's respect that I was clearly losing. The tension escalated when I discovered Stephanie had lied about several expenses. The floral arrangements she claimed cost $4,000 were actually priced at half that amount on the invoice I accidentally saw. When I carefully broached the subject, suggesting there might have been a misunderstanding, she exploded. "Are you accusing me of lying, of stealing from you? This is exactly why I don't include you in these decisions. You always think you know better." I retreated, shocked by the venom in her voice. Frank advised patience. "It's wedding stress, Marge. She's under a lot of pressure. Let it go." So I let it go. And I let it go again when we weren't invited to the menu tasting. And again. When Stephanie changed the wedding colors without telling me, rendering the mother of the bride dress I had carefully selected completely inappropriate. "It's her wedding," became Frank's mantra. "Our daughter only gets married once." But the final straw came when I learned we weren't included in the rehearsal dinner planning. Jacob's parents had taken complete control, selecting a venue we could never have afforded. Patricia called me not to ask for input, but to inform me of the $2,000 per couple cost that we were expected to cover for our portion of the guests. Through it all, I kept hoping for glimpses of my daughter, the girl who once made me handprint cards and called me her best friend. Occasionally, when Jacob and his family weren't around, I'd catch a flash of the old Stephanie. A shared laugh over a childhood memory, a brief moment of genuine connection. It gave me hope that after the wedding madness subsided, I might get my daughter back. But as I watched her become increasingly enthralled with Jacob's world, increasingly dismissive of ours, a cold fear gripped my heart. What if this wasn't temporary? What if the daughter I knew was gone for good? They say truth finds its way to the surface like a bubble in water, no matter how deep you try to bury it. My moment of truth came 3 weeks before the wedding in the cosmetics section of Nordstrom. I was searching for the perfect lipstick for the big day when I heard someone call my name. It was Amanda, Stephanie's friend since their freshman year of college. Amanda had always been warm to me, the kind of girl who remembered my birthday and asked about my garden. "Mrs. Campbell, it's so good to see you," she said, giving me an enthusiastic hug. "Are you getting excited for the wedding?" We chatted about the upcoming festivities, and I mentioned that I hadn't been involved in many of the recent decisions. "Oh, I know," Amanda said sympathetically. "Stephanie mentioned that you've been stepping back to let her work with Jacob's family more. It must be hard." Something in her tone made me pause. "What exactly did Stephanie tell you about that arrangement?" Amanda's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, just that. Well, that Jacob's family is handling a lot of the social aspects, since they're more familiar with the kind of event Stephanie wants. The kind of event she wants, I repeated slowly. Amanda shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in a nearby makeup display. I probably shouldn't say anything more. Stephanie would kill me. Amanda, I said quietly, I think I need to hear whatever it is you're not saying. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. It's just, Stephanie's been telling Jacob's family that you and Frank are, well, that you're not very comfortable in certain social settings, that you're a bit. She hesitated, then whispered, rustic. Rustic. The word felt like a slap. Her words, not mine, Amanda said quickly. She told Jacob's mother that you wouldn't know the right people to invite or how to interact with them, that she was worried you might embarrass her. The cosmetics counter seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What else has she said about us? Amanda looked miserable, now clearly regretting her candor. Mrs. Campbell, I shouldn't have said anything. Please forget I mentioned it. Amanda, please. I need to know. She closed her eyes briefly before continuing. She told them you and Frank lack culture, that you're unsophisticated. She said she's been trying to minimize your involvement to avoid any social missteps at the wedding. Amanda touched my arm gently. I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. The way she talks sometimes when you're not around. It's like she's ashamed. Ashamed. Of us. The parents who had given her everything. I thanked Amanda with all the dignity I could muster, and somehow made it to my car before the tears came. I sat there in the parking garage, sobbing into my hands, feeling as though someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart. When I finally composed myself enough to drive home, Frank was in the kitchen making dinner. One look at my face, and he set down his spatula. What happened? I told him everything Amanda had shared, each word scraping my throat like broken glass. Frank listened silently, his face unreadable. When I finished, he pulled me into his arms. Call her, he said finally. Give her a chance to explain. So I did. With trembling fingers, I dialed my daughter's number. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding annoyed at the interruption. Stephanie. I began carefully. I ran into Amanda today. She mentioned some things you've been saying about Dad and me to Jacob's family. A beat of silence. What are you talking about? She said you told them we're unsophisticated, that you're ashamed of us. That's ridiculous, Stephanie snapped. Amanda's always been jealous of my relationship with Jacob. She's trying to cause problems. So you didn't tell Patricia that we're rustic and might embarrass you at the wedding? Another pause, longer this time. Mum, you're taking things out of context. What's the right context for being ashamed of your parents? Look, she said, her voice hardening. Jacob's family moves in different circles than we do. I was just trying to manage expectations. By belittling us, by excluding us from our own daughter's wedding planning. You're being dramatic. This is exactly why I've been keeping you at arm's length. If you can't be happy for me on my special day, maybe you shouldn't come at all. The words hung between us, a challenge I never thought I'd hear from my child. You don't mean that, I whispered. Try me, she replied coldly and ended the call. I stared at the silent phone, feeling something shatter inside me. Frank found me there, still clutching the phone, tears streaming down my face. She all but uninvited us to the wedding, I told him. Frank's jaw tightened, but he said only, She's bluffing. She needs time to cool down. It will be better by the wedding day. You'll see. I wanted desperately to believe him, but the daughter I knew would never have spoken to me that way in the first place. As I cried myself to sleep that night, Frank held me close, promising everything would work out. Neither of us had any idea just how wrong he would be. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening at Le Chateau, an exclusive French restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. Despite everything that had happened, I spent hours getting ready, determined to put my best foot forward. Frank looked handsome in his new suit, a purchase Stephanie had insisted upon, claiming his regular one wasn't formal enough for the occasion. "You look beautiful," he assured me as we drove to the restaurant. "Remember, this is about supporting Stephanie. Let's focus on that." The private dining room was exquisitely decorated with white roses and gold accents. Patricia immediately took center stage, directing everyone to their seats with the authority of a military general. I noticed she had positioned herself at the head table between the bride and groom, while Frank and I were seated at a table with distant relatives of Jacob's we had never met. "Shouldn't the parents of the bride be at the head table?" I whispered to Frank. He squeezed my hand. "Don't make a scene. It's not worth it." Throughout the dinner, Patricia made numerous speeches about Jacob and the daughter she never had. She barely acknowledged our presence, except to announce midway through the meal, "And of course, we're so grateful to Marjorie and Frank for bringing Stephanie into the world. Though I think we can all agree she's blossomed beautifully since joining our family circle." The comment drew polite laughter from Jacob's relatives. I felt my face burn, but maintained my composure. After dinner, the wedding coordinator approached us with the final invoice for the rehearsal dinner. $8,000. Frank's face paled, but he silently reached for his checkbook. "I thought Jacob's parents were hosting the rehearsal dinner," I said to the coordinator. She looked confused. The reservation was in their name, but I was instructed that payment would come from the bride's parents. As we were preparing to leave, I overheard Stephanie and Jacob in a quiet corner. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Stephanie's laugh caught my attention, that particular laugh she used when she was trying to impress someone. "They have no idea," she was saying. "Dad just keeps writing checks without question. It's almost too easy." Jacob chuckled. "You've got those two wrapped around your finger. The old folks are so desperate for your approval, they'd probably remortgage their house if you asked." Pathetic, right? But useful. My daughter's voice was so cold, so calculating, I almost didn't recognize it. I touched Frank's arm, gesturing for him to listen. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw genuine anger flash in his eyes. His face flushed red, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. Not here. Not now. On the drive home, Frank was uncharacteristically quiet. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned to me with an intensity I rarely saw. "Tomorrow," he said firmly, "we need to stand up for ourselves." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to speak. That night I lay awake, watching the clock tick toward dawn, wondering how we had reached this point. How had our beloved daughter turned into someone who could speak about us with such contempt? What had we done wrong? By the time sunlight filtered through our curtains, I had made peace with whatever might happen. We would go to the wedding with open hearts, but also with our dignity intact. No matter what Stephanie had become, we would remain true to ourselves. How naive I was to think I was prepared for what awaited us. The wedding venue was a historic mansion with immaculate gardens, a crystal-clear lake, and a price tag that had made my stomach turn when I wrote the deposit check for $25,000 3 months earlier. We arrived at 9 in the morning, though the ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon. Frank and I wanted to help with any last-minute preparations to feel useful on this important day. The mansion was already bustling with activity. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces, caterers set up in the gourmet kitchen, and the wedding coordinator darted about with a tablet in hand, checking items off her list. We found her in the grand foyer, giving instructions to a team setting up the sound system. "Good morning," I said brightly. "We're Stephanie's parents. Is there anything we can help with?" She glanced up from her tablet, looking slightly confused. Oh, hello. Actually, everything is under control. The mother of the groom has already checked in and approved all the arrangements. Of course she had. I'd still like to see how everything is coming along. Is Stephanie here yet? Yes, the bridal party is upstairs in the East Wing getting ready, but I believe they requested privacy during the preparation process. Frank placed a steadying hand on my back. My wife would just like to see our daughter on her wedding day. I'm sure that's not a problem. The coordinator hesitated before reluctantly directing us upstairs. As we approached the bridal suite, I could hear laughter and music from behind the closed door. I knocked gently. The door opened just a crack, and one of Stephanie's bridesmaids peered out. Lisa, I think her name was. Though we had only met briefly at the engagement party, her smile faltered when she saw us. Oh, Mrs. Campbell. Mr. Campbell. Hi. Is Stephanie available? I'd love to see her, I said. Lisa glanced nervously over her shoulder. We're kind of in the middle of the hair and makeup. It's a bit hectic in here. I won't take long. Please, I just want to wish my daughter well on her wedding day. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa opened the door wider. Give me just a minute. The door closed again, and Frank and I exchanged glances. We could hear hushed, urgent conversations from within. Finally, the door reopened and Lisa gestured for me to enter. Just me. Frank squeezed my hand and nodded for me to go ahead. The bridal suite was stunning with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Makeup artists and hairstylists worked on several bridesmaids, while champagne flutes and pastries covered a side table. But what immediately caught my eye was Patricia seated in a plush chair in the center of the room, wearing a matching silk robe identical to the ones the bridesmaids wore. Stephanie stood by the window in her robe, her hair half done. When she turned and saw me, her expression didn't soften as I had hoped it might. Instead, she looked irritated, glancing quickly at Patricia before addressing me. Mom, what are you doing here? We're busy getting ready. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to see you before everything gets underway. You look beautiful already. She sighed. You shouldn't be up here. Nobody told you you could come up. I'm your mother, I said, a slight tremor in my voice. I thought. Stephanie looked me up and down, critically taking in the simple dress I had worn to help set up planning to change into my formal attire later. Then came the words that would change everything. You're not invited to this part of the day, she said flatly. In fact, we've decided it's better if you and Dad just attend as regular guests. The room fell silent. Even the makeup artists paused their work, clearly uncomfortable. What do you mean regular guests? I asked, certain I must have misunderstood. Patricia spoke up, then her voice dripping with false sympathy. Stephanie was concerned that you might be uncomfortable with all the formalities, Marjorie. We thought it would be easier for everyone this way. Stephanie nodded. Mum, you and Dad should just sit in the audience. Patricia's husband will walk me down the aisle. Your father won't be walking you down the aisle. The words felt thick in my mouth. William has much more experience with these social events, Patricia interjected. He knows all the proper protocols. It's really for the best. I looked at my daughter, searching for any sign of the girl I had raised. Is this really what you want, Stephanie? For your father not to walk you down the aisle? For us to be just faces in the crowd at your wedding? She lifted her chin slightly. Yes, the Harrisons understand these events better. They know the right way to behave. The implication was crystal clear. We didn't know the right way. We weren't good enough. We never had been in her eyes. In that moment, something shifted inside me, a fundamental realignment of my world. This person standing before me, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, had delivered the cruelest blow imaginable with cold calculation. "I see," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. Frank took one look at my face and knew. What happened? I told him everything, each word painful to speak aloud. With each sentence, I watched my husband's expression change from concern to disbelief to a quiet, contained fury I had rarely seen in 35 years of marriage. "Let's go," he said finally. "Go where, Chong? Home. This isn't our daughter's wedding anymore. It's a performance for people who have no respect for us." As we walked down the grand staircase, I felt oddly calm, as if I were watching events unfold from a distance. This clarity, this sudden certainty, was almost a relief after months of confusion and hurt. As we reached the bottom of the staircase, Frank pulled out his phone and stepped aside to make a call. I stood there in the elegant foyer, watching workers transform the space for a celebration we would no longer attend. Frank's voice was low and controlled as he spoke to someone at our bank. When he rejoined me, his face was set with determination. "I've put a stop payment on all the remaining checks for the wedding. The last-minute payments to the caterer, the band, the photographer, all of it." "Can you do that?" I asked. "They haven't been cashed yet, so yes." His voice was steady. "If they want to treat us like unwanted guests, they can pay for their own party." Just then, Stephanie appeared at the top of the stairs, with Jacob, Patricia, and William close behind. She was still in her robe, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded loudly enough for nearby workers to turn and stare. "Lisa said you were leaving." Frank looked up at her, his expression remarkably calm. "Yes, we are. You've made it clear we're not welcome in the capacity of parents, so we're respecting your wishes and removing ourselves entirely." Jacob stepped forward, his practiced charm nowhere in evidence now. "You can't just leave. You have responsibilities here." "No, actually we don't," Frank replied. "You wanted us to be regular guests. Regular guests don't pay for weddings." Patricia gasped. "What are you saying?" Frank addressed the small crowd that had gathered, including several early-arriving guests and venue staff. "My wife and I were just informed that we're not invited to participate in our daughter's wedding as parents. We've been demoted to regular guests because we're too unsophisticated for this crowd." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Stephanie hurried down a few steps. "Dad, stop it. You're making a scene." "You're right, Ayapja," Frank acknowledged. "Something I should have done months ago when you started treating your mother like an embarrassment. But I kept quiet, Shah, because I thought that's what parents do. I was wrong." He turned to address Patricia and William directly. "We're just simple rustic folk, as you've been told. But this simple man and his wife have written checks totaling $75,000 for today's festivities, checks that are now being cancelled." Stephanie's face went white. "You can't do that. Everything's paid for." "Not quite," I said, finding my voice at last. "The final payments to most vendors are due today. The checks we wrote are being stopped as we speak." Jacob lunged forward, grabbing Frank's arm. "This is extortion. You can't ruin our wedding." Frank calmly removed Jacob's hand. This stopped being our concern when Stephanie decided we weren't worthy of being recognized as her parents. "You and your family clearly believe you're better than us. Let's see if your superior social standing can pay for this wedding." We turned to leave, and Stephanie rushed down the remaining stairs, her voice frantic now. "Mum, wait. You can't do this to me. Everyone's watching." I paused and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. In that moment, I saw not the woman who had just broken my heart, but the little girl who once skinned her knee and ran to me for comfort. The teenager who cried on my shoulder over her first heartbreak. The child we had loved unconditionally. And in a strange way, I still loved her even now. I hope someday you'll understand what family really means, Stephanie, I said softly. It's not about status or appearances. It's about respect and love. When you're ready to offer those things, we'll be waiting. As Frank and I walked to our car, several guests watched in stunned silence. A few actually followed us out, including my brother and his wife, and two of our oldest friends who had known Stephanie since she was a baby. "We're coming with you," my brother said simply. "If they don't want you, they don't want us either." In the car, my phone began buzzing incessantly with calls and texts, first from Stephanie, then Jacob, then Patricia. I silenced it and put it away. "What now?" I asked Frank as we drove away from the mansion, leaving behind the dream wedding that had become a nightmare. "Now," he said, taking my hand, "we start healing." The aftermath was exactly what you might expect. Chaos, accusations, threats. My phone had 67 missed calls by that evening. Stephanie left voicemails that ranged from hysterical crying to cold fury. Jacob's messages were more threatening, mentioning lawyers and lawsuits. Patricia left exactly one message, so dripping with condescension that I deleted it halfway through. We learned later that the wedding had proceeded in some form, though drastically scaled back. Jacob's parents had apparently covered some expenses, but many vendors had simply packed up and left when payment wasn't forthcoming. The lavish 7-course dinner became a hastily arranged buffet. The 12-piece orchestra was replaced by a playlist on someone's phone. The 4-tier custom cake never arrived. For 3 weeks, we existed in a strange limbo. Frank and I took time off work, declining to explain why to curious colleagues. We changed our locks after finding Stephanie had used her old key to enter our house, while we were out leaving a venomous letter on our bed. We sought the advice of a lawyer friend who assured us we had no legal obligation to pay for the wedding after being explicitly excluded from our parental roles. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole to see Stephanie standing on our porch alone. She was thinner than she had been at the wedding, with dark circles under her eyes. I hesitated before opening the door. "What do you want, Stephanie?" I asked, not inviting her in. "This is ridiculous," she said immediately. "You need to make this right. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined the most important day of my life." "I think you have that backwards," Frank said, coming to stand beside me. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded. "Jacob's parents are furious. We've had to move in with them because we can't afford our apartment deposit after covering some of the wedding costs. They bring it up every day how my parents abandoned me." "Is that how you remember it?" I asked quietly. "Because I remember being told I wasn't good enough to be part of my own daughter's wedding." "You're twisting things. I never said that." "You said we should attend as regular guests," Frank reminded her. "You replaced me at the altar with William because he knows the proper protocols. If that's not saying we're not good enough, I don't know what is." Stephanie's composure cracked slightly. "Okay, fine. I shouldn't have said those things. I was stressed and caught up in everything. But to cancel all the payments, to humiliate me like that." "Did you ever once consider how much you humiliated us?" I asked. "Not just at the wedding, but for months before, excluding us, mocking us behind our backs, treating us like an inconvenience." "That's not fair. I was trying to blend two families to make everyone happy." "Everyone except us," Frank said. "So what now?" she demanded. "You've made your point. Are you going to hold a grudge forever? I'm your only child." The words hit like a physical blow. Yes, she was our only child, the one we had dreamed of, prayed for, sacrificed for. And somehow we had lost her long before the wedding day. "Stephanie," I said carefully, We love you. We always will. But love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. It doesn't mean financing your rejection of us. So that's it. You're choosing money over me. Frank shook his head sadly. No, we're choosing self-respect. Something we should have done much sooner. Stephanie stared at us in disbelief, then turned and stormed back to her car. As she drove away, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and peace. For the first time in months, Frank and I had stood united, refusing to be devalued by our own child. That night, I cried myself to sleep again, but the tears were different somehow. Not just tears of loss, but of release. We had finally set a boundary, even though it had cost us dearly. The weeks that followed were among the hardest of my life. There's no guidebook for grieving a child who is still alive who has chosen to walk away. I would find myself picking up the phone to call Stephanie about something trivial, only to remember where we stood. I would see a young mother with a daughter in the grocery store and have to abandon my shopping cart as tears overwhelmed me. Frank suggested we see a counselor, and it was during those sessions that I began to understand what had happened. Our therapist, Dr. Richardson, helped us see how our desire to give Stephanie everything had perhaps prevented her from developing gratitude or empathy. You cannot heal your daughter, Dr. Richardson told us, but you can heal yourselves. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild our lives. 6 months after the wedding, we used some of the money we had saved for retirement money that would have gone to the wedding to take a 3-week trip to Europe. We walked hand in hand through ancient cities, remembering who we were as a couple before we became parents. We laughed again sometimes with a twinge of guilt, but genuinely. I joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children and found solace in knowing I wasn't alone. So many parents sat in that circle sharing similar stories of children who had turned against them often when money or status was involved. It didn't fix the hole in my heart, but it helped me carry the pain more gracefully. Nearly a year after the wedding, we heard through mutual friends that Stephanie and Jacob were having marital problems. Apparently, once the excitement of the wedding was over, they discovered they had little in common beyond their ambition for social climbing. Jacob's parents had become increasingly controlling, using their financial support as leverage. We sent her a card on her birthday with our phone number just in case. It was returned unopened. I planted a garden that spring and named the rose bushes after important women in my life. I left a space for a rose bush named Stephanie, hoping someday I might have reason to plant it. Frank and I celebrated our 36th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. As we toasted each other, he asked, "Any regrets?" I considered the question carefully. I regret not setting boundaries sooner. I regret thinking love meant never saying no, but I don't regret standing up for ourselves that day. He nodded. Me neither. I wish it hadn't come to that, but I'm proud of us for finally drawing the line. That's the lesson I want to share with you today. Love doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean financing your own mistreatment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for someone who's lost their way, is to say no. To allow them to experience the natural consequences of their actions. I don't know if Stephanie will ever come back to us. I hope she will, but only if she's ready to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. In the meantime, I've found a kind of peace I never expected. The pain hasn't disappeared, but it no longer defines me. I've learned to value myself enough to require that others, even those I love most, treat me with basic dignity. And though reaching that point cost me more than I ever imagined paying, I can now say with certainty it was worth it. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping peace and keeping your dignity? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves, even when it's heartbreaking. Thank you for listening to my story today. And remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most necessary healing.